of Industry, Innovation, Science, and Smart Technology. I am your moderator, Jeanette King, Human Resource Officer at the Learning and Development Directorate. This morning's presentation will focus essentially on an overview of the Barbados Data Protection Act 2019-29. It looks at what personal data and sensitive personal data are, the rights of the individual, the Data Protection Commission, its role and responsibilities, obligations of ministries, departments, and agencies in data protection and working in the remote environment. But before we begin, here are some protocols. Here are some protocols for your participation in the webinar. We would like you to mute your microphone and turn your camera off. Pause and or minimize distractions as much as possible. In addition, I would like you all at various stages or points during the presentation to take some time to reflect on your own experiences. You can jot down your notes, formulate your questions, comments, queries, and post them in the chat as required. In addition, there will be the questions and answers segment. And that is when you can post your questions to the presenter. Please note that the presentation is being recorded and the recording will be made available to you on the Learning and Development Directorate's YouTube channel. Colleagues, it's time to begin. And we have with us to share this valuable information, Mr. Clifford T. Bostic. Mr. Bostic has 35 years experience in the area of information communication technology, and he is currently the director of digital infrastructure at the Ministry of Industry, Innovation, and Technology. So ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to Mr. Bostic's presentation on the Barbados Data Protection Act 2019-29. Welcome, Mr. Bostic, and over to you.
Yes, a pleasant good morning to everyone, and I hope you can hear me well. I am going to start my presentation now. Right, and just let me know when you can see that presentation clearly.
I will stop sharing my screen and allow Mr. Bostic to share his screen.
Oh. Okay. One more minute.
Mr. Bostic, we are only seeing part of your screen. You can.
So are you seeing the guidelines for participation at the moment?
Yes, I am.
Right.
You need to advance, but we are only seeing, we're not seeing full screen.
You're not seeing full screen. Okay, hang on. Can you see full screen now?
Not as yet.
What about now?
No.
No?
You have to, I think you're perhaps in presenter mode.
Which screen are you seeing?
Okay, we
Good
can.
morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, again. Thanks for coming. As you know, my name is Clifford Bostic, and I'm here to present to you the Barbados Data Protection Act 2019-29. What that means is that this legislation, this is a piece of legislation which was passed in 2019, and it was the 29th piece of legislation that was passed in the House of Parliament and also approved by the then Governor General, who is now the President of Barbados, in the year 2019. Today, our objectives are to make sure that at the end of the presentation, you understand the key principles of the Barbados Data Protection Act, and that you understand the functions of the Data Protection Commission. We're going to be discussing as well the obligations of ministries, departments, and agencies as it relates to the protection of personal data. We are also going to apply the best practices to reduce the risk of compromise to employees' data as you work remotely. So we're going to be covering those 4 areas during this presentation. The topics, of course, we will look at an overview of the Data Protection Act. We will look at the rights of the individual, the obligations of ministries, departments, and agencies. We will take a closer look at what we mean by personal data, as well as what we mean by sensitive personal data. There's a difference. We will look at the Data Protection Commission and their role and responsibilities in managing the Data Protection Act. And we would also take a look at data protection as it applies to remote working environments that we find ourselves in, for schooling, as well as for performing the functions that we normally do on a day-to-day basis. So, what is data protection? What are we speaking about when we talk about data protection? It is a process. It's a process of ensuring that your data is safe and that it is secure and that it is void of corruption, compromise, theft, or loss. It is to make sure that your data, your personal data in particular, that it is safe and that no one can steal it or change it up or compromise that data, so that it is always safe and clear for you. So today we will also look at the background to the Act, the Barbados Data Protection Act, and we'll take a look also at the fundamentals of the Act. What is this thing we are calling the Barbados Data Protection Act? It is really the legal or legislative and regulatory framework for the protection of data of residents of Barbados. It is intended primarily to take care of the data belonging to the residents of Barbados. It is modeled from the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, which you may hear continuously called GDPR. And what GDPR means, that is a General Data Protection Regulation. It was formulated in 2016 in the European Union, and it was felt that this data protection law came out of something called the Budapest Convention. And the Budapest Convention was a convention where the Europeans got together. I think the Americans were present, and they discussed the protection of data, the protection of information, the protection of information as it related to person. And it is felt that this is one of the most rigorous types of regulations, and so our data protection is modeled from that standard. Barbados is will soon sign on to the Budapest Convention because we feel that it will help us. And this decision hasn't been made, by the way, but it is one of the conventions that we are likely to sign on to. Our Data Protection Act was enforceable at the 31st of March 2021. That is when it became law, and now it is active and it can be implemented. It sets out the individual's rights of access to rectification or to change or confirm their information, their right to have erasure, that is to be able to delete part of that information that is not correct, and there's restriction of processing as well as data portability. So what this means is that you can change that data, you can rectify the data if something is wrong with it. There are restrictions when it comes to processing. It has to be stated clearly what is this data is going to be used for, and it is portable. Why? Because we are in a digital world now today, and government is becoming digital right across the board. We're moving from manual processes to digital processes and online processes. So that data is portable. It can move from servers to laptops, tablets, to phones around Barbados as well as around the world. And as you know, the internet has no borders, so information can move from place to place. It also sets out data protection obligations for persons and entities who process personal data. It establishes the requirements when it comes to breaches, as well as the notification procedures for breaches, international data transfers, which happens on a daily basis, and the data processing registration. So it also applies to individuals and entities established in Barbados, as well as outside of Barbados, who process data, the data of Barbadian residents. Kindly note that because the internet has no borders, our Data Protection Act applies to any data belonging to anyone that crosses our borders. So a person who is browsing on a server in Barbados, resident in Barbados is subject, that data is subject to protection, to the Data Protection Act. Likewise, a Barbadian person who is browsing in Europe, for example, and have their personal data exposed in Europe, that data is subject to GDPR, which is the European model of our Data Protection Act. It also defines what personal data is and what sensitive personal data is. Personal data, I'm going to go into more detail again, but personal data could be your name and address. That's personal. But sensitive personal data refers to your personal identifiable information, the information that identifies you as you uniquely. So it would include such things as your national identification number, your social security number, or your national insurance number. Those things identify you. And of course, other types of information that we'll go into later on. It also outlines certain key principles for the processing of that personal data. It also provides for the establishment of the Data Protection Commission, which is a body of persons set up and trained and armed with the Data Protection Act, that legislation and regulation to do their job, as well as a commissioner who basically holds the responsibility, the overall responsibility for the Protection Commission. What is personal data? So at this point, I just want you to use the chat to give us an idea of what you think personal data refers to. Just 1 minute or so. I gave one example, I gave two examples, your name and address. What else would be referred to as personal data?
Okay, we have some people saying bank information, any data that relates to an individual, telephone numbers, health information. These are what they're proposing for personal data. So we have someone saying your ID number, registration numbers, date of birth, bank information. Any data that relates to an individual. Let's see, medical records, addresses. Those are the responses from our participants.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Yes, and they're all correct. If it's any information about a living person, where that person either is identified or could be identified. So any information that can identify you is personal data. Very good. For example, here are a few: your name, your email address, your contact number. Yeah. And then your sensitive personal data. Now, this is data that is sensitive. This is data that you wouldn't normally want to give to a person. You would not normally want to give a person your health records, which relates to the state of your health. You wouldn't want to give a person your genetic data as well, because that speaks to who you are in terms of the biological functions of your body. What's your DNA? What are you immune to, for example? What are you exposed to? Your biometric data, which is similar as well. That is stuff like what's your blood type? What's your DNA that identifies you as you? And you know, each individual is your DNA is like a footprint or a fingerprint of a person that identifies them. You can test a sample of blood, a sample of saliva, a test of body fluids, and get your DNA, your biometric details. You wouldn't want to give a person your criminal records unless it was like most Barbadians where have not been convicted of any type of crime. You have been a model citizen, but you still wouldn't want to give that information to anyone. Proceedings towards an alleged offense, you wouldn't want that information to be out there either. Your religious beliefs, that's your personal belief in Jesus, your personal belief in gods, etc., etc. Your financial records, and at the bottom, what we call your CVV code or your OTP. Now, this is jargon here. CVV relates to your credit card. At the back of your credit card, there is something called a CVV code. It's usually a 3-digit code in Barbados. And what that is your card validation value. Your card validation value. Very critical piece of information. Never give that to anyone unless you have to and you trust them. And of course, your OTP. And OTP means that's a one-time password. A one-time password. That happens when you're logging into your bank account, for example. There are several banks in Barbados who do this, practice this. It is part of what we refer to as a multi-factor authentication, MFA, and pardon the jargon. And that allows you have a username and a password to get into the account, but then they send you a text message to your phone, and you get a code on that text message, which is a one-time password that you then use to log in. So you have to log in to get into the account. You have to do two things. You have to know your username and password, and then you have to get this one-time password to log into the system. So that's critical, that's sensitive information. You wouldn't give that to anyone. What are the key principles of data protection? These principles are: it is lawful and fair. It must be lawful and fair. That's the first thing. Your data must have appropriate security. So the principles of the Data Protection Act deals with these. appropriate security must be appropriate to stop theft and stop harm and stop being stolen, etc., etc. Data must be held no longer than necessary. No longer than necessary. That's important. It must be accurate. Data must be kept accurate. It must be adequate, relevant, and not excessive. And it must be collected for a specified, explicit, and legitimate purpose. So these are the key principles of data protection. Lawful and fair, appropriate security, held for a specific length of time, must be accurate, it must be adequate and relevant, and not excessive either, and it must be collected for a specific purpose. Now, I invite you to see if you can give the answers to these two questions. The first one, and you're going to tell us if what is being projected is true or false. The Barbados Data Protection Act applies only to individuals and entities established in Barbados. Barbados Data Protection Act applies only to individuals and entities established in Barbados.
Okay, third, I see some responses coming in to the polls from our participants. It looks like the majority of them are saying that it is false, but we will see at the end of the time what that consensus will be. Okay, so we still have them going at the question. Seems as though some persons are changing their minds. Okay. Okay, S. Maynard, yes, you have posted yours in the chat. False or true, you have to select an answer. Okay. So okay, they're still, persons are still going at it. They're not complete. So we have just a few seconds left. And I will end the poll now. So quickly make your selections. And it's the end of the poll. And Clifford, I will share the results of the poll with you. So we have 24% of our participants selecting true, saying thereby indicating that the Barbados Data Protection Act applies only to individuals and entities established in Barbados. And then we have 75% of our colleagues indicating that the Barbados Data Protection Act does not apply only to individuals and entities established in Barbados. So comment from you, Clifford?
Yes, the poll happens to be correct. The Data Protection Act, because we are in an internet environment where persons can be online and enter our borders, do transactions and provide sensitive or personal data through those systems in Barbados while online. So it applies to anyone who does a transaction in Barbados within our borders, and that data is residing for some period of time with a business or a company or an individual who is doing a transaction. So let me just explain a little bit more. So imagine you're in New York City and you are logging into a Scotiabank in Barbados, and you have to enter personal sensitive information into that server or that website. Typical example, for example, if you're on Easy Pay Plus, which is the government's payment portal for online transactions with government, and you're in New York City, and you're paying from your bank account on the Easy Pay portal to pay for, let's say, for example, your license, your driver's license, or to get a police certificate of character, for example, or to get a liquor license, for example. That sensitive data that you have placed on our site is protected by the Data Protection Act. And if any information becomes lost or stolen or corrupted, our commission can take action because it is protected. The law protects the data that it is residing within our borders, even if the data belongs to an individual or company or an entity external to Barbados. And that's because the internet has no boundaries. So it's not only individuals and businesses and establishments in Barbados, but it is anyone who is within our borders with personal data doing transactions, and that data gets compromised in any form or fashion. The app protects it. So wonderful, you've got it right.
Okay, so now for question 2, we see that the majority of our participants have indicated that the 4 indicated true for the question 4. Key principles of data protection are fairness, lawfulness, adequacy, and relevancy. So the majority of them have agreed that these are the 4 key principles, and 11% of our participants have indicated that this is false. So let's hear from you, Clifford.
Yes, so again, the poll is correct, but I have a little bit of a twist here. There are more than 4 principles for data protection, but the 4 that are listed here, fairness, lawfulness, adequacy, relevance, they are correct. There are 4 of the key principles for data protection, but there are of course others, and you see that from the former slide. As we go on, you will see those other key principles. For example, the length of time, and the length of time should not be excessive. The length of time that the data is held must not be excessive. That's a key principle as well. And the relevancy is key. The relevancy is not that only that the information must not be relevant to the person, but it must not be excessive as well. So irrelevant information must not be kept as well. So those are 2 additional ones to make a total of 6. All right, well, thank you very much. You're doing pretty well. Data protection rates. Let's take a look at what we mean by the rates that are part of the Data Protection Act. First of all, the individual has the right for protection of their personal data. It is their right. So what that means is that the Data Protection Act protects your data, is the framework for which the government will protect your personal data. And this extends beyond government. We are today talking among ourselves within central government, but this applies to individuals outside of government as well. You have the right to the fair processing of that data for specific purposes and on the basis of consent from the individual, or on the basis laid down by law. So for example, you need a consent to have your data processed. You also need to have your data processed if it is by law, if there are laws that speak about that data. And of course, you have the right of access to data collected on yourself. So the individual have the right to have access to that data. You also have the right to have inaccuracies rectified. So we talk to ratification in the sense that you have the right to make sure that the data that's being held, your personal data, is actually correct. And you can see that sometimes when you reach retirement, which none of us have reached that age yet, but you reach retirement and you have a spelling mistake in your name that existed forever and ever, and now it has to be corrected. Otherwise, there's some issues that will occur. You have the right to a copy of your personal data that's been processed. So you have a right to see your data in some form or fashion, mainly today, these days, electronically. You have a right to see that personal data, see what it is, what it says. You also have the right to have your personal data erased that is no longer required. So if you had a bank account like most of us do, even though it was told recently that 40% of Barbadians are unbanked, they don't have bank accounts. That shocks me. But you have a right, if you change banks, to have that data that they have on you erased or removed because you're no longer with them. You have a right to have data erased if it is no longer required. And you know cases where you need to have data. For example, you're applying for a visa, go somewhere, and the administrator has your data. You went place and you came back and you no longer require the visa. You have a right to have that data erased from as part of your personal data, or any information that was unlawfully processed. You have a right to have that data erased. Sometimes get marketing information from various companies, and they get the information from your friends and from persons and from places you've been to, and you have a right to have that erased as well. Or you can withdraw your consent to personal data in some cases. And you also have a right, which is very critical. This is a very critical piece of right that you have. You have a right to be notified if there is a data breach. In other words, if your bank has a breach on credit cards, where someone's credit card was stolen and the account emptied or the credit card ran up a huge bill way beyond what they can pay, you, as the owner of that account, have a right to be notified of that data breach. Now let's look at the obligations of our ministries, departments, and agencies within central government. First one is compliance. We have an obligation to comply with the law. So what that means is that we have to look at what the Data Protection Act says, and hence this course as a beginning course to help us on our way. You have to comply. So compliance is an obligation for all of us, ministries, departments, and agencies. Accountability. We will be held accountable. So we have to take on the responsibility of making sure that should anything happen, that we are taking that responsibility to make sure that whatever has taken place stops, is corrected, and that our protection mechanisms are stronger than they were before. And also, this is very important, we have to create that personal data inventory. In other words, we have to know whose personal data is within our confines, so that should something happen, we can identify those persons who are likely to have been impacted. Inventory, very, very important. We need to know whose data we have. Compliance. What compliance means is that you must have adequate documentation of all the personal data that's processed. Along with that documentation, you must know what's the purpose and how long it will be held for processing. Very important. So personal data, you must have the documentation, which includes the purpose as well as how long this data will be held while being processed. Secondly, there must be documented policies and procedures and frameworks on how you're going to process and manage that data. So there must be documentation that you're following, and that documentation must be assessed and reviewed, because we are in a technologically advancing world, and documentation you have today and processes relate to the technology that you have. When the technology changes, you have to change that documentation so that it is in step with the technology. You must have the presence also of a data privacy officer, and that there may not be a person with that title, but you may be a person who holds the responsibility for data privacy. Similarly, just to give you an example, we know that the permanent secretary is the chief financial officer in a ministry. That the permanent secretary holds the responsibility for the financial management of that ministry, along with lots of other things. So a data privacy officer may not hold that title, but there is someone who holds that responsibility. Ministries, departments, and agencies must demonstrate and document the ways in which they comply with the protection principles when transacting business. And this is where the accountability comes in. This is where taking responsibility for what happens in the department. And so there must be demonstration that you're really taking care of business. I will give you a very short example. Currently, we have files on our desks. We have files with critical information about individuals, businesses in Barbados, that we are trying to provide them with either licenses or some kind of permission to do something within our environment. Demonstrating that you are compliant with data protection principles would mean that that file will not be left on your desk in an open office, or in an office that has a door that is open where anyone can walk in and out, etc. So you must demonstrate that you understand the criticality of the information and that you're making sure it is not left for anyone to have sight of who needs not to have sight of that. MDAs must live up to the expectations and delivery of products and services, and of course, their behavior and their interactions. And you know that data protection is about personal data, it's about sensitive personal data. And you have to be careful that in your actions, that you're comfortable, that you're not exposing that data to anyone within earshot, or within the eyesight of persons who will look and see things and write it down. And these days, the phones and cameras will record as well as take pictures. So your comfortability, that's why your comfortability refers to how you handle day-to-day services and interactions, as well as how you demonstrate that you understand what the principles are when transacting. Creation of a personal data inventory. That is the inventory of all those persons who has data within your organization, who has stored data electronically or physically or manual hard copy, because it will take some time for us to transition away from paper-based to electronic files completely. There are a few things that must be taken under consideration. Why are we holding this information? For what purpose are we using this information? That must be clear. How did we obtain it? How did we get this information from the individual? And why was it originally gathered? How long will we retain this information? So how secure is it? Is it encrypted or is it accessible? Encryption speaks to electronic files that are coded with a key. So you take a piece of electronic file and you code it and you use a key And that key is used to decrypt the information. So you encrypt using a code and you decrypt to see what the information is when it's received at the other end. So I'll say that again. You can take information and encrypt it so that anyone looking at it electronically wouldn't be able to figure what it is. And then you want someone to see that information, then you decrypt it using the code, and the person who decrypts it using the correct code can see that information. And so that leads in, that's a measure of security for the electronic files, and accessibility applies to both electronic as well as hard copy files, where accessibility may mean that you have a key an electronic key to see any information, or you have a physical key, go into a cabinet and see information that's stored in the cabinet. Do you share this information with third parties, and why? Very, very critical. Who else sees this information and why are they seeing it? In our government, with our ministries, departments, and agencies, we are setting up something called electronic services. In this project being run in this, which will allow ministries to share information about clients to avoid them having to go to every ministry they have to do business with and take the same information, whether it's electronic or physical. Those days are coming to an end where it is easier for a person to do business with one ministry, and once they have done business there, the critical, sensitive, personal information that's required for the next ministry is available through a system that's being set up right now. So third parties will refer to ministries, departments, and agencies. It could also apply to private sector organizations that want to do business with individuals within our country who have done business with government as well. It facilitates the benefits of the inventory, will facilitate the amending of incorrect data. So for example, you have a list of all your clients that are doing business with you. You recognize that that information changes, people's addresses changes, their place of work changes, their health matters changes, hopefully for the better. They gain qualifications and more money, hopefully, as well as they change, I didn't want to go into this, but they change their beliefs in the various religious sects and so on and so forth, and they may need to change it. So the inventory must be able to allow persons to amend any incorrect data or changes any incorrect data. It expedites tracking of third-party disclosures as well. So you must know which other third party has access to information that your client has given you as the holder of that information. It also ensures that data is handled legally, securely, and effectively. Legally means that there's law, overarching law handling that data, which is the Data Protection Act. Securely means that you have secure measures in place so that people can't hack into it, people can't intrude, people cannot obscure, people cannot take your data and encrypt it and then ask you to pay some money to get the encryption keys. And it must be handled effectively. That is, it must not be left exposed anywhere. It must not be left for persons to easily get to it. It must not be left in a place where when something happens, there's no backups and so on and so forth. So that inventory must not only be secure, but allow for amendments, but also be effective and how it's handled, and it must be covered by the law. Now we come to the Data Protection Commission. These are the ladies and gentlemen, along with the commissioner, who now have authority and responsibility for holding up the rights of this framework, this legal and regulatory framework that we have set up in Barbados that mirrors the general data protection regulations out of the European Union. These are the functions of the Protection Commission. First of all, it regulates the processing of personal data. What that means is that we have regulations in place which speaks to how personal data is processed. So every single individual entity and business in Barbados is regulated when it comes to the processing of personal data that they're keeping on their clients. It monitors and audits where necessary. The monitoring and auditing will come in many cases. One, when there's a breach that has been reported, then the audit takes place and monitoring takes place. The audit takes place to see the risk or the depth of the risk that's involved, and the monitoring takes place to make sure that the problem has been solved indeed, and that recurrence is reduced. It advises on data protection implications and proposed policy and legislation. Advises on data protection implications and proposes this policy and legislation. And of course, this Data Protection Act is active since March 31st, 2021. But you can bet with the changes in technology and changes in the way we do business will mean that at some point in time that it will be up for review and make it stronger. The Commission also conducts investigations into breaches of data protection. So someone comes to the Commission and says there has been a breach, and here are the details, and the Commission does the investigation. The Commission also provides guidance to those data controllers and processors. Those are the persons who work within the various ministries, departments, and agencies whose job it is to process and control data. Promotes public awareness and understanding of the obligations, risks, and rights. This is huge, folks. This starts with this kind of program that we're on now, but it goes deeper than that. Beyond this, it goes into continuous discussions until we are all comfortable about what those risks and obligations are, and of course what those rights are. And now we come to quiz time again. And the first one is, which one of these is an inaccurate statement in relation to data protection rights of individuals? You have A, B, and C. A says, every individual has the right to the protection of their personal data. B, every individual has the right to erase any information from his or her file. And C, every individual has the right to be notified of a data breach where the breach is likely to result in a risk to their rights and freedom. Which one is inaccurate? So let's take a few minutes. The answers coming in. They all look right. So it is answer B. Every individual has the right to erase any information from his or her file. That is inaccurate because you can imagine what would happen if every individual had the right to erase their information. You would have, for example, in banks where people have accounts, they will go and erase information that identifies them if they intend to cause harm or steal or misguide a person or the organization. And it could happen in the health sector, it could happen in the agricultural sector, it could happen in the legal sector, etc., etc. So B is inaccurate. That's an inaccurate statement. So all I'm seeing so far is correct.
Okay, Clifford, I'm going to launch poll number 2, question number 2. Is that okay?
That's okay.
Okay. So I see all of the participants to the question, which one of these is not a function of the Data Protection Commission? Everyone has chosen A. Regulates the funding of ministries, departments, and agencies. So everyone is saying that that one is not a function of the Data Protection Commission. So let's hear from you, Clifford.
That's correct as well. The Data Protection Act does not regulate the funding of ministries, departments, and agencies. The funding of ministries, departments, and agencies is a function of the Ministry of Finance, who sit with various ministries, departments, and agencies around this time to discuss budgets and so on. Right. The function of the commission, of course, is to monitor and audit personal data and to conduct investigation into breaches, among other things.
Okay, thank you, participants. So I am going to now launch question number 3. Question number 3, which of these are 3 key obligations of ministries, departments, and agencies regarding data protection? So I see that 12% of our participants have indicated erasure of data, conducting investigations, and compliance. Then we have B, accountability. That is 21% of our participants are saying accountability, auditing, compilation of data. And C, the majority of our participants have indicated. Thank you, Carmelita. Carmelita has indicated C, thank you. So the majority of our participants have indicated that compliance, accountability, and creation of their personal data inventory are 3 of the key obligations of the Data Processing Commission. So we're waiting for you to give us a response to that. Which of these 3 groups are correct?
Right. The most correct one is C, of course. These are compliance, accountability, and the creation, which is the keeping of that personal data inventory. And you notice that that's missing from answer A and answer B. Not that those things are not part of the obligation, but the most correct answer is C. Compliance, accountability, and of course, personal data inventory, which is key, very key to the operations of any ministry, department, or agency. And this extends into the private sector as well.
So thank you, participant.
Great. So let's now deal with data protection and working remotely. Very, 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 very important. Why? In your office, in your ministry, departments, and agencies, you have access to a government-wide area network where there is, in my view, adequate protection for the use, manipulation, transferability, and viewing and compiling and inventorying and recording and backing up that data. Not that there aren't people who will eventually break into it, but they would have a hard time breaking into it, in my view. What we have to continue now is to keep protecting that data, protecting that wide area network as much as we can. So when you're working remotely now, you are now moving away from the office environment into your homes or into a place where you can work from outside of the office, and for protection, for health reasons, and to protect you from COVID and so on. But you are now into a new layer where we don't have an extended way to protect you. So there are a couple of things that will come out. So data protection risk in the remote work environment. First of all, there's an increased chance of compromise to your home Wi-Fi networks and routers. You may not have the kind of sophistication that resides in government at your home. In other words, you may not have firewalls, and a firewall, when you hear about a firewall, what that means generally in layman terms, that this is a wall that's in your home, that should there be a fire within a room, that the fire wouldn't escape to another room easily, that the walls are covered in thicker material that would keep the fire located to where it is. So you and I know that in Barbados, when there's a fire in one house, it usually burns a couple more houses and so on and so forth. So those firewalls are not very well implemented in homes in Barbados. But within business, firewalls are like the gatekeeper, the guy at the gate who says, hold, where are you going? Why are you coming here? This is the internet access, this is electronic. Where are you going in here? Do you have a username and a password? Are you can you authenticate? If no, stop. You can't get any further. In your home, you may not have firewalls and so on your Wi-Fi networks or your routers. So that's a layer of risk that goes up. Secondly, there's an increase in sensitive information being shared via email. So now you're home and you're reading email that you would normally be reading at the workplace, on your laptop or desktop, in your office, whether it's open or you have a closed door office, and you're in that protected environment, firewalls and so on in existence, software that helps to protect you, and I'll mention some of them in a few minutes. But you do not have that at home. So there's an increase in sensitive information being shared via email, where that email could become that email and an attachment. Email in itself is sensitive, the words are used, and the attachment may have on sensitive information which could be stolen. And of course, your personal data could get stolen or inadvertently lost or destroyed. That's possible. There is an increase in the risk of ransomware attacks, phishing attacks, as well as credential theft. Ransomware attacks are those where people take your data, get access to your data by some means, by some form or means. They penetrate your systems, they can see your data, and they take the data and encrypt it using a code, and then they want to sell you that code for you to then decrypt your information. So let me say it again. Ransomware is about where attackers come into your system, take your data, encrypt your data. So next day you show up, see that data, and you can't read it because it is encrypted and you didn't encrypt it, and you don't have the code, and they then want to sell you the code. Usually, most persons do not accede to paying the ransom. Why? Because invariably when you pay the ransom, the code they give you won't work. And then you could be paying ransom over and over again. So usually what happens is that data has to be reconstructed or taken from backup facilities. Phishing attacks. These are when folks come in on your email account and they try to trick you. They try to trick you in responding to a message or clicking on a website or clicking on or reading the email, and then you end up with issues later on your system or in your network. And of course, credential theft. This is prevalent as well, where your username and password are stolen, where your personal identifiable information is stolen, and then someone can emulate you on the system. There's increase in unauthorized exposure of data. So the data can be seen by your family members or roommates. That's something that we have to be aware of as government officers. When you're at home or away from the office, you have to be very careful about what you leave exposed on your laptops and tablets and other devices. There's also a lack of effective control mechanisms at home, such as firewalls, as we mentioned before, schedule backups where you back up your data. Some of us have drives that we use, and of course, in-house IT support is almost non-existent. Unless you're an IT person and you're at home, then yes, but otherwise, most people won't have that. Right? And so there are ways to reduce these risks. There are ways to reduce the risk to what we just mentioned before, the risk of ransomware, phishing attacks, the risk of exposure of data to other persons, etc. Backing up information to a cloud platform or some other external storage alternative is one of the fastest ways to get information stored on systems that you don't have to purchase the equipment. It is just the data that you're interested in keeping safe. And the cloud technology originated, of course, in bigger countries like North America, Europe, and so on. But you'll find more and more cloud technology infrastructure available closer to the Caribbean, places like Miami, Puerto Rico, and the Bahamas is now getting a cloud infrastructure, and we will be fighting and struggling to make sure that Barbados gets on board with one of the 3 top cloud providers so that we have backups on island. And of course, for the IT guys, we know who they are. Amazon, represented by Amazon Wireless Services, one of the top. There's also Azure, which is run by Microsoft, also in the top. And then there's Google, also in the top. So one of those 3, we will at some point in time have cloud infrastructure or platform where the actual equipment is in Barbados. And when you talk about cloud, it is not really just in the sky, it is in Barbados, will be in Barbados, available and ready for the particular services that we need hosted. The use of a virtual private network access, your VPN, having access to a VPN at home that you can log into your protected network, your protected government-wide area network, or a network that is specifically for your ministry, allows for another layer of protection. Why? Because firewalls exist at the gate to the entrance to your government network, and then there are software tools that exist, for example, like ESET. Most of you would have seen ESET. ESET is what we refer to as endpoint security. It actually helps to protect your devices from all kinds of viruses and attacks that may exist on your email, for example. And there is also network security, and one of those network security tools is called Proofpoint. What Proofpoint does is it monitors your network. This is software protection. The hardware protection is a firewall, which has software that runs at the gates of your servers and so on. That's your infrastructure equipment. You have ESET, which runs on your desktop or your laptop and protects you from persons sending you things that can cause harm on your devices, and you have to point that monitors your network. Should anything go wrong with your network, you point with a whole information that's on data that's on your network. For example, your emails, and we'll only release it when it is sure or when it has some faith or confidence that no, your network is safer, and we can now send you the data that you wanted. And of course, the third one is the use of endpoint security, which is stuff like ESET, for example. So those are some of the remedies to reduce your risk when you're working remotely. And you will see these tools on your laptops and tablets and so on. You also need to establish clear procedures for seeking guidance and reporting data breaches. This is important. This is very important. You have to know what details to provide, and there must be a procedure. These are things that will come down. They will come down to ministries, departments, and agencies in time, so that all of us are doing the same thing the same way. The guidance and reporting of data breaches are very specific, so that the commission can do its work. So the commission has a responsibility to help you with this, so that you can help them manage the sector. Monitor compliance with policies by employers. As long as you have, in order to have compliance, it means that you have to know what it is, what the policies are, and what folks need to be doing. You need to know what are your commitments to following the Data Protection Act. And of course, the use of monitoring software. There's several types of software monitors in place. Today, this is software monitoring. This is not the monitoring of a person's whereabouts or a person's actions. This is software that monitors your systems to make sure that they're working properly and that there's no harm being created. And there's several of those types of software in use. Because it is monitoring and because it's about security, we try not to have in-depth discussion of them. The discussion is usually just on the surface. So the monitoring software is going to see when there's something being injected in your system. It's going to alert you, and then you can alert your administrators. You will see strange things, and then they will try and fix the problem. And we have come to the end, and it's time for questions. The floor is open.
Colleagues, you can now post questions in the chat. Clifford, I have some questions already here for you from the participants. So we have a question from Sharon. Sharon wants to know how can an individual know that these things are in place in the government institutions? So I think Sharon was referring to the obligations of the ministries. Sharon, if that is correct, please put a notification in the chat for me. Just want to be clear that that's what you are asking. Are you referring to the obligations? Right, that is correct. Sharon says that is correct. She was referring to the obligations. So how can an individual know that these obligations are in place in government and other institutions?
Right. So there will be in-depth discussions going on. At the moment, the commission has not been set. As far as I know, the commission has not been fully set up yet. We have a commissioner in place. She has a secretary. Her name is Lisa Graves. She has a secretary, and she is working seriously with us to have the commission set up. There needs to be a number of things that has to happen before the market can function properly. So in essence, we have the law passed and is enacted. We have started the process of setting up the commission. Out of the commission will come the procedures as well as the obligations, as well as the documentation that needs to be done. While that's happening, there will be awareness programs like this one. They will be going through what the act says in detail. It's a huge document, but we can break it down into small chunks and go through those so that people can start to see, well, if the law says that you must have inventory for all your clients who have data with you, and the inventory must have any specific information, for example, name, address, and their personal identifiable information, plus why the data is being collected, plus how long we will be using this data. That if that process must be well outlined and discussed and implemented with all the ministries, departments, and agencies. So this is the start basically of where we are, but lots of work now has to be done so that everyone is familiar, knows it, not necessarily by heart. We don't expect you to know the Data Protection Act by heart, but there's some very basic things that we mentioned here in this program that will be put in place for you. So right now, you will not know what the obligations are in essence, but hopefully in short time you will get an appreciation of what that is, and we'll work with you towards providing that documentation and policy framework and so on and so forth that you need, stuff that you can read, and it will be electronic.
Okay, thank you, Clifford. We have another question. We actually, our time is actually up, but we will share at least two more questions, and then those questions that we are not able to answer at this time, we will forward them to Mr. Bosick for you participants, and within a week's time, you should get the answers to those questions. So I have two more questions here for you, Clifford. Just a moment.
Yes.
Will MIST be updating systems to ensure only persons who need access to the Clifford, you can help me here. It looks like PLL or PII or P11, PII? Okay, right. So will MIST be updating systems to ensure only persons who need access to PII have it and no one else?
Yes. As we speak now, I did allude to two projects that the ministry is undertaking. One is electronic services. It's called e-services for government. And e-services will be managing, will have on board police certificate of character, for example. They will have on board the liquor license, for example. They will have on board the electronic passport implementation for individuals in Barbados, for example. And there will be several other services that will come on, like your driver's license, for example, and so on. These things are being set up electronically, and and I will tell you this because you're all government officers, part of the framework for making sure that it's secure is that there will be security servers set up. Let's say, for example, at where the Barbados Police Service has their network, and I can't tell you where that is, but where they have their network, where they process applications for police certificate of character, will be a security server. So if they have their servers, then a security server is put in place there. And the connection between that security server and MIST in our data center, where we have the servers that are used up providing the services for government, will be another security server, a central security server. And the aim is that you have security at the source where the information is, and you have security at the object where the data is being stored now in government. So a person applies to government online, and they come onto a web portal. That is a portal which is on the internet. It looks like a website. You go there, you actually see that website now. It's called big website for government, and your PII, which is your personal identifiable information. Always remember this: PII only refers to your personal identifiable information. That's information that identifies you uniquely as a unique individual. So the PII for Clifford is going to be very different from the PII for Jeanette King, because that information identifies us. When you log into the web portal, do business with government for police certificate of character, you're going to hit a web portal that has firewalls and that hardware, that has software that is going to be monitoring that link, and the information coming into our e-services. You're going to meet a security server, and when your request goes out to the police services equipment or infrastructure, it's going to hit another server, another security server before it gets to the police's systems. And they have firewalls as well. They have actually on websites, they have web firewalls, which are software firewalls as well. We have also put remote monitoring systems on all these devices. In short, we have implemented reactive types of systems, which are firewalls, and we have also implemented proactive types of systems, which go beyond just reacting. They go beyond prevention, so they can see an attacker coming and stop it. We are not, remember this, we are not Jesus and his, sorry, we're not God and Jesus up here. They're none, as far as they know, in the IT world, but we are putting as much protection as we can based on what financial resources we have and the resources on our people to stop theft and to stop degradation, ransomware, and that kind of thing. Not saying we won't get hit. I'm not saying we won't be penetrated. I'm not saying we won't become vulnerable, but we're trying our best to put as many things as we have that we can afford right now in place. So there is security. There's the authentication. There will be multi-factor authentication when you log into that web portal to do business with government. In short, you will have a username and password, as well as you will get your one-time password coming via a text message on your phone or another device, and you will use that password that you shouldn't show anyone to get into the system. So we're doing as much as we can. Later, we will know the National Digital ID system, which is another layer of security. So your ID card will no longer be just a card. It will be a secure way of saying you are, proving that you are who you say you are. And it will, hopefully, if finances become available, hopefully if you're able to get this done quickly as we are planning to do, it will be available on your cell phone as well, so that you'll be able to authenticate who you are, who you are online. So those are some of the measures that we're putting in place. I think I can tell you this as well because we're all part of one government. We have a cert that we're building now, this is cybersecurity incident response team, which will look out for major incidents that are coming across our shores from from all across the world. And once that's rolled out, that will be another layer of security that we put in place. We are young and immature in this area, but we will be one of the first Caribbean countries to have it in place. And once it gets in place, then we will develop the skill sets, and over time, our folks will become not only aware, but they'll be able to help with security. So the wonderful question is about security. Yes, there is security in place. We have to manage it on a daily basis. We have to grow with it. There's a path that we have to take with security, where you start building out your footprint of secure places. It's like at your home. Your first level of security is going to be your fence and your gate. Your next level is going to be your dogs. And some people have some really big, massive dogs. Your next layer is going to be security at your doors, locks and bolts, and all kinds of things. And then you're going to have security cameras in place to see what's happening, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we're doing. We're building that level of security in from the beginning. It takes time. It's a journey that we're all on. So it is not just me staff, but it's all the staff and all the various ministries, departments, and agencies, not only the IT staff, but also us as users, us as people who are using the system. You have to become not only aware through training and stuff like that, but also to be able to use the systems adequately and have a hygiene. You know that as a child, when you get to the major road, you look left and you look right, and you look left and you look right, and you start to cross and you're still looking left, still looking right.
Okay, excuse Clifford, Mr. Bossett Clifford.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, yeah, we realize our time is up, and we do respect other people's time, because I recognize that some of our participants are saying their goodbye, because I figured they have to get back to their regular work. So colleagues, we let Mr. Bostic wrap up the session, but before you go, I would like you to complete the participant feedback form, which we have placed in the chat for you. So please fill that out, send us back that information. That is very important to us. It helps us to enhance the SATS productions for you. So help us to help you. Please complete that feedback form. It's in the chat. Just scroll up a bit and you will see it there in the chat. Click on it to access the feedback form. Thank you. Mr. Bossett, you can continue.
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you. I quite enjoyed the program, the webinar. I hope you have, all of you have. I saw over 70 persons on board this morning. I just want to say thanks to the Ministry of Public Service. My thanks goes out to all those persons who are part of Human Resource Learning and Development Directorate. I want to thank your director, Ms. Faye Brown. I also want to thank Jeanette King, who actually put this together and gave guidance, good guidance, I must admit, to make sure that the presentation was done well and that it was an interactive session. Thank you very much, Lisa. Also want to thank Mr. Michael Clark. Also keep getting his name wrong. Sherwin Ellis is the host. Also, get her name wrong as well.
That is Ms. Sheldon Sentwali.
Sentwali. I have to twist my tongue to say Sentwali, but yes, thank you very much, Sheldon. It was nice seeing you again. And all of the members of the Ministry of Public Service who are part of this program. I quite enjoyed it, and the questions that are coming back from the participants, we'll be happy to take them and provide the answers as well.
Okay, thank you, Clifford. I myself, I want to say my thank you. Thank you, participants, for joining in this session, your questions, your comments, your queries. Like also to extend my thanks and gratitude for Mr. Clifford for consenting to come and present this information for us. I also wish to thank Ms. Lisa Graves for providing the content for this webinar. Ms. Lisa Graves is the Data Commissioner at the Ministry of Industry, Innovation, Science, and Technology. And also extend thank you to my team, or I should say our team, Mr. Sherwin Ellis, Senior Human Resources Officer, who is my co-host, and Mr. Michael Clark working in the background, my producer, who would have taken care of the technical issues. Thank you again, colleagues, for joining, and I wish you all a wonderful remainder of the day.